The taxi pulled up slowly in front of the Grand Hotel, just as the evening lights began to glow across the street. The sky was painted with soft orange and purple shades, the kind that made travelers pause for a moment before stepping inside. Pam Bondi looked out the window, tired but relieved that her long day was finally coming to an end. She had been traveling for hours, meetings, delays, and endless waiting. All she wanted now was a quiet room, a warm shower, and a few hours of peace before the next morning's event. The hotel looked beautiful from the outside. Tall glass doors, shining marble floors, and uniformed staff greeting guests. It seemed perfect, at least from a distance. But the moment she walked through the revolving doors, something felt different. The cheerful energy that usually filled nice hotels was missing. A few staff members behind the front desk looked up briefly, then back down at their screens. One of them whispered something to another, and they both smiled in a way that made her uncomfortable. She stood there patiently, suitcase by her side, waiting for someone to check her in. After a long minute, one of the clerks finally looked up. "Yes?" she asked flatly, without a smile. Pam returned a polite smile and said, "Good evening. I have a reservation under Bondi." The clerk typed something on her computer, sighed loudly, and said, "It'll take a moment. Our system's slow." Her tone was cold and distant, like she was doing Pam a favor just by looking at the screen. Pam nodded, trying to stay calm. She had been in many hotels before, some where staff treated her kindly, others where she was just another guest. But this felt different. It wasn't just indifference, it was judgment. She could sense the whispers continuing behind her. Another staff member joined the clerk and looked at the computer, then at Pam, and said quietly, "Oh, that's her?" The other one nodded, and both smiled faintly. Pam didn't respond. She simply took a slow breath and looked around the lobby, pretending not to hear. The hotel itself was stunning. Golden lights, large vases of white flowers, and soft music playing near the elevators. Guests moved around easily, smiling, laughing, and being helped with their luggage. Yet for some reason she stood there feeling like she didn't belong. Finally, after what felt like forever, the clerk handed her the key card and said, "Room 1422, elevators to your right." Pam thanked her quietly and took the card. But before she turned, she heard the same clerk say under her breath, "These people always think they're special." She froze for a second. She wasn't sure if she heard it right, and even if she had, she didn't want to make a scene. She just nodded slightly, lifted her suitcase handle, and walked toward the elevator. Her heels clicked gently on the marble floor as she tried to shake off the awkward feeling. Inside the elevator, she leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here for work, to give a talk at a conference about professionalism and ethics, a topic she had spent years studying and living by. Still, part of her couldn't ignore how quickly people could form opinions. When she reached her floor, the hallway was quiet, lined with soft lights and clean carpets. She opened her room door, set her bag down, and exhaled. The room was elegant. Large bed, soft lighting, a city view that sparkled against the night sky. For the first time that day, she smiled. She poured herself a glass of water, sat by the window, and let her thoughts settle. The whispers downstairs had stung more than she wanted to admit. She had grown used to people having opinions about her, but it still hurt when simple decency was missing. She had learned long ago that the way people treat strangers often says more about them than about the person they're judging. After freshening up, she ordered some soup from room service. The waiter who delivered it was polite, a young man who smiled warmly and said, "Hope you have a pleasant evening, ma'am." That small kindness meant more than he probably realized. She thanked him sincerely and left a small tip on the tray. Later that night, as she was preparing her notes for the morning, her phone buzzed with an email reminder from the conference organizer. The event would be held in the same hotel's grand ballroom. She smiled at the convenience, not knowing that this would make tomorrow far more interesting than anyone expected. Around midnight, Pam finally turned off the lights and went to bed, but her mind replayed the lobby scene again and again, the glances, the tone, the subtle laughter. She didn't hold anger. She just felt sadness for how easily kindness could disappear in people who were supposed to serve others. She whispered to herself before drifting to sleep. Always stay kind, even when others aren't. Morning came with soft sunlight slipping through the curtains. Pam got ready calmly, wearing a simple yet elegant outfit, her hair tied neatly. She wasn't one for showing off. She liked simplicity. When she stepped into the elevator again, she met a few guests chatting happily. One of them recognized her and greeted her warmly, saying how much they admired her work. Pam smiled modestly, thanked them, and wished them a good day. Downstairs, the atmosphere was different. The same staff were at the front desk. When they saw her, they exchanged quick looks. The woman who had checked her in gave a small, forced smile and said, "Good morning, Ms. Bondi." Pam nodded politely and said, "Good morning." She wanted to believe they were just having a bad day yesterday. Maybe she was too tired to read the room right. But as she waited for her breakfast table to be set, she overheard faint laughter again from behind the desk. "She's acting all calm now," one whispered. "Wait till she starts demanding things again." Pam turned slightly and saw them look away quickly. The server who brought her coffee looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry about the delay, ma'am," he said softly. She smiled and said, "No worries. Take your time." She didn't want anyone to get in trouble, but she also didn't want to ignore what was happening. She believed in quiet strength, handling disrespect without returning it. So she decided to respond in her own way, by showing grace where others showed pride. As she sat sipping her coffee, a few guests nearby seemed to notice the tension too. One older woman at the next table leaned over and whispered kindly, "Don't mind them, dear. Some people forget their manners." Pam smiled faintly and thanked her. The breakfast was simple but good. She left another tip, thanked the server again, and went back to her room to finish getting ready for the event. She had no idea that the same people who had judged her would soon be watching her from the audience. By noon, the hotel lobby had transformed. Staff members were moving quickly, setting up decorations, microphones, and banners. There was a buzz of excitement in the air. An important guest speaker was scheduled for the afternoon conference. The front desk staff whispered among themselves, curious who it might be. "I heard she's some kind of leader or lawyer," one said. "Probably one of those boring speakers they bring in every year." Pam walked by quietly, carrying a folder in her hand. None of them paid attention. She smiled to herself, not out of pride, but out of quiet amusement. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons without a single word. That night before, she had promised herself not to let the incident bother her. But now, standing in the same lobby filled with chatter, she realized something important. Sometimes the best way to deal with disrespect isn't confrontation, but composure. Later, when she entered the ballroom to meet the organizer, the same staff stood at the entrance helping guests find seats. One of them glanced up, eyes widening as she recognized Pam. "Wait, that's her?" she whispered to another. "She's the guest speaker?" Pam smiled kindly and greeted them as she passed by. "Good afternoon," she said in her calm, steady voice. They could barely respond. As she walked toward the stage, her steps were confident but gentle. She wasn't there to prove anything to them, but fate had arranged this moment perfectly. Tomorrow they would see her not as a tired guest at a front desk, but as someone who earned respect the right way, not through status but through humility. That night, as the ballroom lights dimmed and the crowd prepared for the conference, those same employees would learn something that would stay with them far longer than any guest complaint ever could. Pam didn't know it yet, but her quiet patience was about to teach a lesson no speech could ever match. The morning sun filled the hotel with a warm golden light, but for Pam the day felt heavy. She tried to shake off the memory of the front desk the night before, yet small reminders of that coldness lingered in her mind. She reminded herself that she wasn't there for comfort or attention. She had work to do and her focus needed to be on her speech. Still, something about how she was treated felt unfair, not because of who she was, but because no guest deserved that kind of disrespect. After breakfast, she sat by the window in her room, reading over her notes again. The topic of her talk was about integrity, how people show their true selves when no one is watching. It was a subject close to her heart. Over the years, she had seen how simple kindness could change situations, how a small act of patience could soften anger. And yet here she was preparing to talk about ethics while being tested by the same principles herself. Around noon, her phone rang. It was the conference organizer, a cheerful woman who thanked her again for agreeing to speak. "We're so honored to have you, Pam. The staff has been preparing the ballroom since early morning. You'll be the final speaker before the award ceremony." Pam smiled, appreciating the kind tone. "Thank you. I'll be ready." She hung up and decided to head downstairs early to get a sense of the place before the event started. As she stepped into the elevator, a man carrying cleaning supplies smiled politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Going to the ballroom?" "Yes," she replied kindly. "You must be working hard today." He nodded. "Always. Big events mean long hours." His honesty made her smile. It was refreshing to hear someone speak with such simplicity. She thanked him, and when the elevator doors opened, she wished him a good day. The lobby was busy again, but this time, it was filled with guests in suits and elegant dresses. There was a low buzz of conversation, the kind that fills the air before an important gathering. Pam walked slowly, unnoticed at first. The same front desk staff were still there, talking quietly among themselves. When they saw her, one of them straightened up slightly, pretending to work. Another gave a short nod that didn't reach her eyes. Pam returned the nod and walked toward the ballroom area. But as she passed the desk, she heard a familiar voice from behind say, "She's back again. I hope she doesn't start complaining about something else today." The words were sharp enough to stop her mid-step. She turned slightly, not to confront, but to look at them. The clerk quickly looked down, pretending to type. Pam took a slow breath and continued walking. Inside, she could feel a quiet ache, not of anger, but of disappointment. When she reached the ballroom entrance, a hotel staff member greeted her politely and handed her a guest badge. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you here for the conference?" "Yes," Pam said with a small smile. "I'm one of the speakers." The staff member's expression changed instantly. "Oh, I see. Please, this way." Pam thanked her and followed her inside. The room was bright and beautifully arranged. Rows of chairs, a decorated stage, a long table for panelists. Technicians were testing microphones, adjusting lights, and checking the sound system. Everything was neatly prepared. She found a quiet corner seat and sat for a few minutes, observing the people around her. Attendees chatted excitedly, flipping through their event programs. Pam noticed her name printed near the end of the list, right under the section titled Keynote Address, The Power of Character in Professional Life. She smiled quietly to herself. How ironic, she thought. The same people who had judged her would soon listen to her talk about the importance of treating everyone with respect. A few moments later, the conference organizer spotted her and rushed over with a warm smile. "Pam, you're here early. Perfect, we'll do a quick mic test in about 20 minutes. Can I get you something to drink?" "A glass of water would be lovely," Pam said. As she waited, she saw some hotel staff bringing trays of refreshments into the ballroom. Among them was the same young woman from the front desk. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The woman froze for half a second, then quickly turned away. Pam said nothing. She didn't believe in embarrassing people, not even when they deserved it. She believed that time and truth usually handled those lessons better than anger ever could. The event began with light applause as the host took the stage. He welcomed everyone warmly and thanked the hotel management for their hospitality. The front desk staff stood near the back, assisting with the guest lists, unaware that their earlier guest was now about to be the center of attention. One speaker after another talked about leadership, honesty, and service. Pam listened carefully, taking in each story. But deep inside, she thought about the irony of words versus actions, how easy it was to speak about values, yet how rare it was to live them when it truly mattered. When her turn finally came, the host stepped forward with a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome our final speaker of the day, a woman who has dedicated her career to public service, ethics, and leadership, Miss Pam Bondi." Applause filled the room as Pam walked up the stage calmly, her steps light but steady. She could see the crowd clearly now, and at the back near the door, the same employees who had looked down on her stood frozen in surprise. One of them whispered something to another, both realizing too late who they had been mocking the day before. Pam smiled, not at them, but at the room as a whole. She placed her notes on the podium, took a sip of water, and began speaking. Her voice was gentle but carried strength. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to be here today to talk about something that matters deeply to me. Character. Not the kind we write on resumes or display in public, but the kind we show when no one's watching." The room was silent. Her words flowed naturally like a quiet river, steady and sincere. She spoke about kindness, about humility, and about how the smallest actions can reveal the biggest truths about who we are. "Sometimes," she said softly, We meet people for only a few minutes at an airport, a store, or a hotel, and we may never see them again. Yet how we treat them can leave an impression that lasts far longer than we think. Respect doesn't cost anything, but it tells the world what kind of person you truly are. Several people in the audience nodded thoughtfully. The message was simple, but it hit deep, she continued, sharing a few stories from her life, times when she had been treated kindly by strangers, and how those moments reminded her of humanity's quiet goodness. Then, without mentioning names, she shared one more story. Just yesterday, she said calmly, I arrived at a hotel after a long flight. I was tired and worn out. I didn't need anything special, just a smile and a bit of understanding. But sometimes people make judgments without knowing who you are or what kind of day you've had. And that's when true character gets tested, not theirs but yours. The crowd listened intently. She didn't point fingers, but her words painted the picture clearly enough. In the back of the room, the hotel staff who had mocked her earlier stood still, realizing what she meant. Pam smiled gently and said, I chose not to respond with anger, because anger teaches nothing. But respect, especially when it's undeserved, can teach everything. The real strength isn't in proving someone wrong. It's in showing them what right looks like. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Guests stood up, clapping with genuine admiration. Cameras flashed, and the host came back to the stage to thank her. The front desk staff remained silent, their eyes lowered, faces pale. They didn't know where to look. After the session ended, people gathered around Pam, shaking her hand, taking photos, and thanking her for her message. She stayed humble, smiling and talking kindly to everyone. A few hotel employees, including the same clerk from the night before, lingered near the edge of the crowd. Pam noticed them but pretended not to. She wanted them to come to her on their own, not out of fear but understanding. When most of the guests had left, one of the young employees finally approached her. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Ma'am, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Pam stopped her gently with a small wave of her hand. It's all right. You don't have to explain. Just remember, every guest deserves respect no matter who they are. The young woman nodded, her eyes wet with guilt. Pam gave her a kind smile. You're better than one bad moment, she said softly. As Pam walked away, the rest of the staff stood quietly, still processing what had happened. For them, it wasn't just a talk. It was a lesson they would carry long after the conference ended. That night, as Pam returned to her room, she looked out the window at the glowing city below. The world was full of noise and pride, but she believed kindness still had power, the quiet kind that changes people from the inside out. She took a deep breath, smiled faintly, and whispered to herself, Let your grace speak louder than your name. And somewhere downstairs, a few hotel workers silently promised themselves to never treat another guest that way again. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with energy. Staff hurried through the lobby, moving trays, adjusting decorations, and answering questions from early arrivals. The hotel manager walked briskly from desk to desk, checking schedules and nodding to employees, all while keeping an eye on the conference preparations. It was a big day, and everyone felt the pressure. Pam Bondi had finished her breakfast quietly in her room, sipping tea and reviewing her notes once again. Even though she had spoken the day before, she wanted to make sure every detail of today's session was just right. She wasn't there to seek attention or applause. Her goal was to leave a meaningful impression, something real that could last long after the lights dimmed. When she stepped into the lobby, the atmosphere was different. The same front desk staff who had been cold and dismissive before now seemed hesitant and unsure. Their movements were sharper, their eyes darting to see if she was watching. One of them adjusted her hair nervously, while another cleared his throat and pretended to check the computer. Pam walked calmly, her posture relaxed but confident. She didn't want to humiliate anyone. She simply wanted to focus on the event. She carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind that makes people realize their mistakes without a single harsh word. As she approached the grand ballroom, she noticed staff setting up chairs and testing the sound system again. She recognized a few familiar faces, the young clerk and the server who had treated her with subtle kindness the day before. They glanced at her briefly and then looked away, unsure how to act. Pam paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She reminded herself that true leadership is not about showing power, but about inspiring respect through calm action. She smiled faintly and continued toward the stage area. The manager approached her then, offering a warm handshake. "Pam, I want to apologize again for any discomfort you may have experienced yesterday. It was unprofessional and I promise it will not happen again." Pam nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I just hope everyone understands that respect is the simplest thing we can give each other." He smiled, impressed by her composure. "I do. And I think after today everyone here will understand it even more." As the conference began, attendees arrived steadily. The ballroom filled with people in suits and dresses buzzing with excitement. Some whispered about the keynote speaker, unaware that she had already impressed many the day before. Others chatted about their own experiences, sharing stories and opinions. Pam took her seat quietly at a small table near the stage, watching the room come alive. She noticed the staff who had judged her before, now moving around nervously, checking that everything was in order. Their earlier confidence had faded, replaced by a careful, almost fearful attention to detail. When it was time for her session, the host introduced her warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is someone who has dedicated her life to public service and integrity. Please welcome Pam Bondi." Applause filled the room. Pam walked up to the stage calmly, her step steady, her smile gentle. She placed her notes on the podium and looked out at the audience. Her eyes caught the staff members at the back, their faces pale and uneasy. She began speaking, her voice soft but firm. "Good morning. Yesterday I shared some thoughts on character and respect. Today I want to continue that discussion by focusing on how small actions can make a big difference." Her words were simple, yet powerful. She spoke about everyday moments when people are tested, not in grand gestures, but in quiet choices. She talked about how kindness, patience, and understanding can change a person's experience, and how disrespect can leave lasting scars. Without naming anyone, she described moments she had encountered in her own life, times when people had judged her unfairly or treated her dismissively. The audience listened intently, some nodding quietly while others leaned forward in thought. Pam spoke slowly, ensuring each word had meaning. It's easy to judge someone based on appearances, rumors, or assumptions. But the real test of character is how we treat others when no one is watching, or when we think no one is watching. Because even the smallest act of respect can leave a lasting impact. She paused, letting the words sink in. Across the room, the employees who had judged her just hours ago shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The lesson was clear. Actions matter more than impressions. And respect is earned through behavior, not titles or fame. As she continued, she told a story of a time when she had been tired, stressed, and traveling. Without pointing fingers, she described how simple kindness from a stranger, an extra smile, a patient response, or a small gesture, could completely change the course of a day. Her voice was calm, but each story carried weight, resonating with the audience. The young clerk from the front desk, who had whispered about her yesterday, now stood quietly near the back, her eyes fixed on Pam. She could feel the truth in every word, guilt mixed with realization, creating a strange sense of discomfort she had never felt before. Pam's words didn't just reach the audience, they reached the employees. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She simply embodied the principle she was speaking about: grace under pressure and respect even when undeserved. When she finished, the applause was long and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Cameras flashed and many rushed forward to meet her, shake her hand, and express their appreciation. Pam smiled and spoke to each person sincerely. She thanked them for listening and reminded them that everyone has the ability to make a difference, no matter how small their actions may seem. After the crowd dispersed, one of the young hotel employees approached her, eyes downcast. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for how I treated you yesterday. I didn't realize. I didn't think." Pam stopped her with a gentle smile. "It's okay. The important thing is that you understand now. Everyone deserves respect, and recognizing that is the first step toward being better at what we do." The employee nodded, tears in her eyes. She had expected a scolding or worse, anger, but instead she received calm guidance. That moment of humility and grace left a lasting impression. Other staff members began to approach as well, some hesitating, others quietly offering apologies. Pam listened to each one patiently, acknowledging their words with simple kindness. Her response wasn't about making them feel bad. It was about teaching them what real respect looks like. By the end of the day, The atmosphere in the hotel had shifted. The staff who had been rude or dismissive before now worked more carefully, spoke more politely, and showed genuine attentiveness to guests. The lessons of the morning had been subtle but effective. Pam had not yelled, not demanded, not embarrassed anyone. She had simply shown through her actions and words how respect and kindness could change everything. In the evening, the manager invited her to a small reception for speakers and organizers. As she walked in, she noticed the same employees serving drinks and refreshments. Their faces were respectful, cautious, but also slightly hopeful. They had learned something important. Actions speak louder than words, and true influence comes from integrity, not intimidation. Pam mingled briefly, offering warm smiles and sincere conversations. She didn't need to dominate the room. Her presence alone had left an impression stronger than any speech or directive could. Before leaving, she thanked the manager again. "I appreciate the way you handled the situation today. I hope this is the start of a positive change here." He nodded. "It is. I've never seen the staff react this way before." "You've shown them something they won't forget." Pam smiled quietly. She didn't need praise. Seeing the staff begin to understand, seeing the ripple effect of her calm and kind approach, that was reward enough. Later, back in her room, she reflected on the day. She had faced judgment, impatience, and subtle humiliation, but she had responded with grace. She had turned an uncomfortable experience into a moment of learning, not just for the audience, but for those who had underestimated her. As she looked out the window at the city lights, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Change doesn't happen through force. It happens through patience, integrity, and example. And sometimes the most powerful lesson is the one taught without a single harsh word. In the lobby below, the staff gathered quietly after their shift. They discussed what had happened, admitting mistakes, and wondering how someone could remain so composed under pressure. They didn't fully understand it yet, but they felt the impact. For the first time, they realized that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you give, and it comes back in ways you cannot always measure. By the end of the night, the hotel felt different. The tension had lifted, replaced by a quiet awareness. Guests would be treated with better care, staff would act with more thoughtfulness, and a subtle culture of respect had begun to grow, all because one woman had chosen to respond with kindness rather than confrontation. Pam Bondi had left a mark, not through anger or drama, but through quiet strength and grace. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she felt at peace, knowing that the world still had room for dignity, humility, and lessons that speak louder than words. The morning after the conference, the hotel was quieter than usual. The energy of the previous day's event had faded, leaving behind a calm, reflective atmosphere. Guests moved slowly through the lobby, some heading to breakfast, others checking out early. Pam Bondi, as always, kept to herself, walking gracefully toward the elevator. She was feeling neither pride nor frustration. She simply wanted to continue her work and to carry the lessons from yesterday forward in a quiet, meaningful way. When she passed the front desk, she noticed the same employees she had encountered before. They were not rude, but something in their movements had changed. The young clerk stood upright, eyes focused, hands neatly folded. The server who had whispered apologies before looked nervous but respectful, ready to assist anyone who approached. Pam smiled faintly at the difference. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but small gestures often revealed the largest changes. As she entered the elevator, a bellhop holding luggage smiled and nodded. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely. "Hope you slept well." Pam nodded in return. "Thank you." "I did." It was a small interaction, but it reflected the subtle shift she had noticed. Yesterday had left an impression on these employees, and it seemed that, at least for now, they were choosing to act with care rather than assumption. She spent the morning in her room preparing for the second day of events. This session was less formal, more interactive, with opportunities to speak directly to attendees about challenges in leadership and ethics. She enjoyed this format because it allowed her to connect with people personally, to listen as much as to speak. By mid-morning, she made her way to the ballroom. Staff members were moving efficiently, carrying out their duties with quiet professionalism. The tension of yesterday's mistakes was still present in their minds, but now it was tempered by a newfound awareness. They had learned something important, and for some, That knowledge carried a mix of guilt and determination. Pam arrived early and found a seat in the back corner, giving herself a clear view of both the audience and the staff. She noticed the manager walking through the rows, nodding to employees, encouraging them quietly. It was clear he wanted them to recover from the previous day's errors and to show their best effort. As guests began to arrive, she observed them closely. Many recognized her from yesterday's speech and approached to offer greetings. Others were entirely new, unaware of who she was. She treated every interaction with the same calm respect, smiling, shaking hands, and speaking politely. She did not allow the fame or recognition she had earned to create distance between herself and anyone in the room. The staff who had been dismissive before watched closely from the edges of the room. They were cautious, careful not to make any mistakes. Every movement was deliberate, every word measured. They seemed to understand, without needing to be told, that their actions mattered more than their intentions. When the session began, Pam was invited to speak first. She approached the podium with quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the audience, lingering briefly on the staff who now stood still, attentive and noticeably different from the day before. "Good morning," she began. "Yesterday I shared some thoughts about character and respect. Today I want to continue that discussion, but in a more personal way. We all face moments in life when we are tested, not in grand gestures but in small, quiet ways. How we respond in those moments defines who we are." Her voice was steady, soft, yet carried a weight of sincerity that drew the room's attention. She spoke about leadership, emphasizing that it is not measured by power or titles, but by the ability to inspire others to act with integrity. Pam shared personal stories of challenges she had faced, times when she had been underestimated, dismissed, or treated unfairly. She spoke not to complain, but to illustrate that true strength comes from maintaining composure and grace even when others fail to do the same. "Sometimes," she said, "we encounter people who judge quickly, who speak without understanding, or who act as though their own opinions are more important than the dignity of others. We cannot control their behavior, but we can control our own, and how we respond can teach more than anger ever could." The audience listened intently. Many nodded in agreement. Some whispered among themselves, and others sat quietly absorbing the message. The hotel staff, meanwhile, remained on the sidelines, their faces serious, eyes wide. They could not ignore what she was saying. Every word was a mirror held up to their behavior, and for the first time they saw themselves clearly. Pam continued, describing how simple acts of respect, offering assistance without judgment, speaking kindly or listening carefully could create lasting impressions. She contrasted these with moments of rudeness or arrogance, showing how those actions could harm not only relationships but also the reputation of the person responsible. Without directing it at anyone in particular, she told a story of an encounter at a hotel, the same story that had caused discomfort among the staff before. She spoke of arriving tired and weary, expecting nothing more than courtesy, only to face impatience and whispered judgments. She did not name anyone or raise her voice. She did not seek revenge or embarrassment. She simply explained how those moments of unkindness could impact someone else's day. The young clerk shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the manager, who avoided eye contact but gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The staff member realized that the lesson was not just about behavior, it was about awareness and empathy. Pam's voice softened, yet every word was deliberate. "I chose not to respond with anger. I chose patience and understanding. And in doing so, I believe the lesson becomes clearer for everyone involved. When we respond with grace, we show the world what true strength looks like. That is something no judgment or insult can ever take away." Applause filled the room as she finished speaking. Guests rose to their feet, clapping warmly and genuinely. Cameras flashed, and several attendees approached to express appreciation for her words. The staff remained quiet, their expressions a mix of guilt, reflection, and newfound respect. They were not being punished, but the truth of their actions had been revealed in a way they could not ignore. After the session, one of the employees approached Pam quietly. "Ma'am, I want to apologize. I didn't realize how wrong I was. I promise it won't happen again." Pam looked at her calmly, nodding. "Thank you. The most important thing is that you understand now. Respect is not about fear or obligation. It is about seeing the value in every person. Another staff member followed, more hesitant but equally sincere. I should have treated you better yesterday. I'm sorry, Pam smiled, gently reassuring them. It's okay. The lesson is what matters. You can always choose to do better. The employees left with a sense of relief and reflection. They realized that their previous arrogance or carelessness had consequences, but that change was possible. Pam had not yelled, criticized, or shamed them. She had simply shown them the power of quiet dignity and thoughtful action. Later that day, the manager invited Pam to a small meeting with the hotel staff. She accepted, curious about how they would respond. The meeting was simple. Pam spoke about professionalism, integrity, and the impact of small actions on people's lives. She encouraged them to treat every guest with courtesy and respect, to listen carefully and to act with empathy. The staff listened intently, taking notes, asking questions, and engaging in conversation. For many, it was the first time they had truly considered the human side of their work. Pam's calm approach made it clear that respect and kindness were not optional. They were essential. By the end of the meeting, the mood in the room had shifted. There was a sense of understanding and commitment. The employees left with a renewed sense of purpose, aware of the difference they could make through simple acts of care. Pam returned to her room later that evening, reflecting on the day. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her message had reached not only the audience but also those who had once underestimated her. The experience reinforced her belief that real influence comes not from force or authority, but from integrity, patience, and the courage to lead by example. As she looked out over the city lights, she realized that even small gestures, patience, listening, a kind word could ripple outward in ways that changed people and institutions. The hotel would be different now, not because of rules or regulations, but because of awareness, respect, and the example she had quietly set. Pam Bondi understood that real leadership is often unseen, subtle, and consistent. It is not about making a spectacle or seeking recognition. It is about embodying values every day in every interaction, and allowing those actions to teach and inspire others. As she drifted to sleep, she knew the lessons of these 2 days would stay with her, and with the hotel staff for a long time. They had been tested by a moment of judgment, and they had begun to learn what it meant to respond with care, humility, and respect. And somewhere downstairs, the staff discussed quietly among themselves, realizing that the actions of one calm, graceful person had changed not just their perception of her, but also their understanding of how to treat everyone they encountered.